Subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin. The sand burned orange under the dying sun as Brett Hayden crouched behind a crumbling wall in Fallujah, his rifle steady against his shoulder. 8 years in special operations had taught him patience, and tonight's raid on a high-value target required every ounce of it. The six-man team moved like shadows through the compound, their movements synchronized through years of training and dozens of missions together. Brett was point, his eyes scanning the darkened courtyard through night vision. At 34, he'd seen enough combat to fill 3 lifetimes, but his mind stayed sharp, his instincts honed. The target, an arms dealer supplying insurgents, was 3 rooms away. Brett signaled his team, and they advanced in formation, boots silent on ancient stone. Then his phone buzzed. Protocol demanded silence during operations, but something made him glance at the screen. Unknown number. Every instinct screamed at him to ignore it, but his son's face flashed through his mind. 8-year-old Tommy, with his gap-toothed smile and obsession with dinosaurs. Brett had missed his last birthday for this deployment. The phone buzzed again. He signaled the team to hold position and stepped back into a shadowed alcove, pressing the phone to his ear. "This is Hayden." A woman's voice, trembling and raw. "Mr. Hayden? This is Dawn Hand. I'm a nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital in Virginia." Her words came fast, desperate. "Your son, Tommy, he's here. His spine is broken. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The world tilted. Brett's back hit the wall, his breath coming in sharp gasps. What happened? His stepfather threw him down the stairs. 2 flights. The paramedics said. They said it's a miracle he's alive. He's in surgery now, but Mr. Hayden, you need to come home. Brett's mind went blank, then flooded with white-hot rage. Where is he? The man who did this? Dawn's voice dropped to a whisper. He's not arrested. His father is District Judge Victor Mason. The police came, took statements, and then nothing. The case was closed before it even opened. I heard the officers talking. They got a call from someone high up. Malcolm Mason walked out of here like nothing happened. Malcolm Mason. Brett repeated the name, burning it into his memory. "Mr. Hayden, I shouldn't be calling you. I could lose my job. But I saw your little boy, saw what that monster did to him, and I couldn't." Her voice broke. "No one will help your boy. The Masons own half the county. The judge has connections everywhere. Except you. You're the only one who can help him." Brett's training kicked in, pushing emotion aside to focus on intel. "Tell me everything. Every detail." Dawn explained in hushed tones. Malcolm Mason, 38, the judge's only son and a failed lawyer who'd crashed out of 3 firms for substance abuse and violent behavior. He'd married Sheila Hayden 2 years ago, shortly after Brett's deployment. The judge had money, influence, and a reputation for crushing anyone who challenged the Mason name. Malcolm had a history. Dawn had heard whispers from other hospital staff about previous incidents, other victims, all swept under the rug by Victor Mason's power. Tommy woke up for a few minutes before surgery. Dawn added, her voice thick with tears. "He was crying for you. He said Malcolm got angry because he spilled juice on some papers. Just juice. That's why he threw him." Brett's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "How bad is the damage?" "Severe spinal trauma. The surgeons are operating now. But even if they can stabilize him, Mr. Hayden, Tommy might never walk again. And your ex-wife, Sheila, she's here, but she's defending Malcolm. She says it was an accident, that Tommy fell on his own." The rage crystallized into something cold and precise. Brett had planned countless operations, had hunted men across deserts and mountains, had learned every way to break an enemy. "I'll be there as soon as I can. Please hurry. And Mr. Hayden, be careful. The Masons don't play fair." The line went dead. Brett stood in the darkness, his hands shaking. Behind him, his team leader, Captain Eric Sandoval, appeared at the alcove entrance. "Hayden, we got movement. What's going on?" Brett looked at him, and Sandoval's expression shifted from confusion to concern. They'd served together for 6 years, had saved each other's lives more than once. "It's Tommy. Someone hurt him. Bad." Sandoval didn't hesitate. "Go. We'll handle the raid." "No." Brett's voice was flat, controlled. "I finished the mission. Then I go home. Brett, I said I finished the mission. He pushed past Sandoval, rejoining the team. His hands were steady now, his mind clear. He'd compartmentalize, just like he'd been trained. Complete the objective, then deal with the next one. And the next objective was named Malcolm Mason. The raid took 40 minutes. They breached the target building, secured the arms dealer, and extracted without casualties. Brett moved through it mechanically, his body executing trained movements while his mind churned with images of Tommy falling, screaming, breaking against hardwood floors. Of Malcolm Mason walking free. Of Judge Victor Mason using his power to protect a monster. When they returned to base, Brett went straight to his commanding officer. I need emergency leave. Family crisis. Colonel Tyrone Schultz, a grizzled veteran who'd known Brett since his first deployment, took one look at his face and signed the paperwork. How bad? Bad enough. Brett's voice was ice. Schultz studied him. You planning something stupid when you get home? No, sir. Just planning something necessary. Hayden, Colonel, you've known me 8 years. Have I ever acted without thinking? Schultz leaned back in his chair. No, you're the most calculated son of a bitch I've ever commanded. That's what worries me. Whatever you're planning, make sure you can live with it afterward. I can live with anything except failing my son. The flight home was 18 hours of hell. Brett sat rigid in his seat, his mind running through scenarios, tactics, contingencies. He'd spent years learning to infiltrate, to gather intelligence, to neutralize targets without leaving traces. Those skills had been honed for war, but war was just another word for protecting what mattered. And nothing mattered more than Tommy. He thought about his ex-wife, Sheila. They'd married young, both 22 and stupid with love. But military life had ground them down. The deployments, the missed birthdays and anniversaries, the constant fear that he wouldn't come home. When Tommy was 5, she'd asked for a divorce. Brett hadn't fought it. He'd seen too many broken military marriages, knew that forcing someone to stay only bred resentment. The divorce had been clean, the custody arrangement fair. He got Tommy for summers and holidays when he wasn't deployed, paid child support without complaint, called every week when he could get a signal. Sheila had been a good mother then, devoted to Tommy's happiness. But 18 months ago, she'd met Malcolm Mason at some charity event the judge had sponsored. 6 months later, they were married, and Brett had felt uneasy about the rush but said nothing. It wasn't his place anymore. Now he understood that unease. His instincts had screamed danger, and he'd ignored them because he wanted Sheila to be happy, wanted Tommy to have a stable home. That decision burned in his gut like acid. The plane touched down in Richmond at dawn. Brett had one duffel bag and the clothes on his back. He caught a cab to St. Catherine's Hospital, watching the sun rise over Virginia hills he'd grown up in. This was home, or it had been before the military took him around the world. Now it felt foreign, contaminated by the knowledge that his son lay broken inside those white walls while his attacker walked free. He found the ICU on the 4th floor. Dawn Hand was at the nurse's station, her exhausted eyes widening when she saw him. Brett looked every inch the soldier he was, 6'2", lean muscle, cropped dark hair, and eyes that had seen too much death. His face was weathered beyond his years, carved by sand and sun and violence. Dawn hurried over. Mr. Hayden, I'm so glad you made it. Tommy's out of surgery. He's stable, but where is he? Room 418. But you should know, your ex-wife is in there. And Mr. Mason, Malcolm, he's been here too. The judge posted security outside Tommy's room. Private guards. Brett's eyes narrowed. Why would he need security? Unless he's afraid someone might want to finish what he started. Mr. Hayden, please. You can't cause a scene. They're looking for an excuse to keep you away from your son. He forced his breathing to slow, his military training taking over. Dawn was right. Charging and angry would play into their hands. The Masons wanted him to be the unstable ex-husband, the violent soldier who couldn't control his temper. They'd use it against him in court, maybe even get a restraining order. No, he needed to be smart. He needed to be the man who'd planned 100 successful operations. I understand, he said quietly. I just want to see my son. Dawn nodded, relieved. This way. As they walked, she continued in a low voice. The surgery went better than expected. They were able to stabilize his spine, but there's significant nerve damage. The doctors won't know the full extent for weeks, maybe months. He might regain some function, or... She didn't finish the sentence. Brett stopped outside room 418. Through the window, he could see Tommy's small form in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes. His heart, trained to remain steady under fire, cracked straight through. That was his boy, his whole world, reduced to a broken body and beeping monitors. Beside the bed sat Sheila. She'd changed in the 2 years since he'd seen her last. Thinner, her blonde hair perfectly styled even now, wearing designer clothes that screamed money. Malcolm Mason's money. Malcolm Mason, who stood near the window, tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of arrogant posture that came from never facing consequences. His face was red, probably from alcohol, his eyes bloodshot. He was gesturing, talking, and Sheila nodded along like a puppet. Brett pushed open the door. Sheila's head snapped up, and her face went pale. Brett. Malcolm turned, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Then it vanished behind a sneer. Well, the hero returns. Little late, don't you think? Brett ignored him, moving to Tommy's bedside. His son's face was peaceful in sedation, but bruises darkened his forehead and cheek. Brett's hand shook as he touched Tommy's small hand, carefully avoiding the 4 lines. What are you doing here? Sheila's voice was sharp. You can't just... He's my son. Brett's voice was deadly quiet. I have every right to be here. Your son who you abandoned for your precious military career. Malcolm spat. Maybe if you'd been around, this wouldn't have happened. Brett slowly turned to face Malcolm Mason. The man was bigger up close, maybe 6'3", outweighing Brett by 30 pounds. But size meant nothing. Brett had killed men twice Malcolm's size with his bare hands. The challenge was not doing it now, in this hospital room with witnesses and cameras. You threw my son down 2 flights of stairs, Brett said, each word precise and controlled. You broke his spine, and you're going to tell me it's my fault. Malcolm's face flushed darker. It was an accident. The kid tripped. I tried to catch him, but... Liar. The word hung in the air like a blade. Malcolm took a step forward, but Brett didn't move. He just stared at the man, the cold, dead-eyed stare that came from facing death so many times it became routine. Malcolm stopped. Brett, please. Sheila stood, placing herself between them. Malcolm didn't mean for this to happen. Tommy did trip. It was terrible, but it was an accident. The police investigated. They cleared Malcolm, because his father is the judge. Brett's eyes never left Malcolm, because the case was closed before it opened. That's not an investigation. That's a cover-up. You need to leave, Malcolm growled. Now, or I'll call security. I'm not going anywhere. I have custody rights. Unless you want to explain to a real court why you're trying to keep a father from his injured son. Sheila grabbed Brett's arm. Please, don't make this worse. Tommy needs peace right now, not a fight. Brett looked at her, really looked at her. She was terrified, he realized. Not of him, of Malcolm. She was defending her husband, but her hands trembled, and her eyes kept darting to the bigger man like a beaten dog watching its master. You know what he did? Brett said softly, just to her. You know it wasn't an accident. Why are you protecting him? Tears filled Sheila's eyes. Just go. Please. The door opened, and 2 security guards entered. Not hospital security, but private contractors in expensive suits with earpieces. One of them, a cold-eyed man built like a tank, stepped forward. Mr. Hayden, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. On whose authority? Judge Victor Mason's. He's filed for an emergency protective order on behalf of his grandson. You're not to come within 500 feet of the boy or any member of the Mason family. Brett's mind raced. A protective order. They played their first move while he was still in the air, probably had a friendly judge sign off on it before Brett even landed. Smart. It bought them time and painted him as the threat. I haven't been served, Brett said evenly. You're being served now. The guard handed him a folded document. You've got 60 seconds to leave voluntarily, or we remove you forcibly. Brett looked at Tommy one last time, memorizing his son's face. Then he looked at Malcolm Mason, who smirked with all the confidence of a man who'd never lost anything that mattered. "This isn't over," Brett said. "Yeah, it is," Malcolm laughed. "You're nothing, Hayden. A grunt who plays soldier while real men build empires. My father owns this county. You don't even own the clothes on your back without the government's say-so. Stay away from my family, or you'll regret it." Brett walked out of the room with the guards flanking him, his face expressionless. But inside, something clicked into place. Malcolm Mason had just made a critical mistake. He'd underestimated his enemy, revealed his arrogance, and given Brett exactly what he needed: motivation without mercy. As the elevator doors closed, Brett pulled out his phone and started making calls. He had a war to plan, and this time, the enemy wore suits instead of uniforms. That just meant a different battlefield, different tactics. But the objective remained the same: complete and total victory. Brett checked into a cheap motel 15 miles from the hospital, a single room that smelled like cigarettes and defeat. He dumped his duffel on the bed and pulled out his laptop, immediately setting up a secure connection through military-grade VPN software. Old habits. He'd spent years gathering intelligence in hostile territory. This was just another reconnaissance mission. First, he pulled up everything publicly available on the Mason family. Judge Victor Mason, 68, had sat on the district court bench for 23 years. Before that, he'd been a prosecutor with an 87% conviction rate. Impressive on paper, suspicious when Brett dug deeper. Several cases had been overturned on appeal for prosecutorial misconduct, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. But those reversals had come years after Victor made judge, and the legal community had quietly buried them. Victor's wife, Glenda Stratton Mason, came from old Virginia money. Her family had owned textile mills before foreign manufacturing gutted American industry. She sat on the boards of 3 charities and 2 museums, playing the society matriarch. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. But the society pages showed her at every major event with the state's political elite, governors, senators, congressmen. The Masons had reach. Then there was Malcolm. Brett pulled up his son's history and felt his jaw tighten with each new detail. Malcolm had graduated from a prestigious law school, but never passed the bar exam despite 3 attempts. He'd worked at his father's firm. Victor had maintained a private practice alongside his judicial duties, a potential conflict of interest that nobody questioned, until the firm quietly let him go. After that, Malcolm had bounced between positions. A brief stint at the state attorney's office that ended abruptly, a job at a corporate law firm that lasted 6 months, then nothing. No official employment for the past 4 years. He lived off a trust fund and his father's money, spending his days at the country club and his nights at upscale bars. Brett found 3 DUI arrests, all dismissed. 2 assault charges, both dropped when witnesses recanted. A domestic disturbance call from an ex-girlfriend, no charges filed. The pattern was clear. Malcolm was violent, volatile, and completely protected by his father's influence. A knock at the door interrupted his research. Brett's hand went instinctively to the K-bar knife in his duffel before he called out, "Who is it?" Dawn Hand, the nurse from the hospital. Brett opened the door. Dawn stood in the dim hallway, still in her scrubs, exhaustion carved into her face. "How did you find me?" "I asked around. Military guys usually stay at this motel. It's cheap and close to the VA hospital." She glanced past him into the room. "Can I come in? I have information you need." He stepped aside, and she entered quickly, closing the door behind her. "I could lose my license for this, but I can't just stand by anymore." "What happened?" Dawn pulled out her phone, her hands shaking. "After you left, Malcolm got drunk. Started bragging to the security guards about how untouchable he was. One of the guards he's a friend, former military, hates the Masons but needs the money. He recorded some of it." She played the audio. Malcolm's voice, slurred and arrogant. "Stupid kid should have known better than to make a mess. I told him to clean it up, but he started crying, whining for his daddy. So I helped him down the stairs. Little accident, right? Dad'll handle it like he handles everything. That's what you pay for. Results without consequences." The recording cut off. Brett's hands had curled into fists so tight his knuckles were white. "Can I have a copy of that?" It won't hold up in court. Illegally recorded, and my friend could be charged. But I thought you should know, this wasn't his first time. Tommy wasn't the first kid he hurt. Brett's head snapped up. What? Dawn sat on the edge of the bed, looking like she might collapse. 6 years ago, Malcolm was married before. His wife had a daughter from a previous relationship, about 7 years old. The girl ended up in the ER with a broken arm. Said she fell off her bike. But I worked that shift, and the brake pattern was wrong. Someone had twisted her arm until it snapped. Did anyone report it? The attending physician tried. Child Services investigated, but the case disappeared. The wife divorced Malcolm 3 months later and left the state. I tried to find her a few years ago, but it's like she vanished. The judge probably paid her off, made her sign an NDA. Brett felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't just about Tommy. Malcolm was a serial abuser protected by his father's corruption. How many other victims were out there, silenced by money and power? There's more, Dawn continued. I pulled Malcolm's ER records. I could be fired just for accessing them. But she handed Brett a printed sheet. 5 visits in the last 3 years. 2 broken noses, fractured orbital bone, dislocated shoulder, and a concussion. All from accidents or sporting injuries. But the injuries are consistent with someone getting beat up. Brett scanned the document. Someone's been hitting back. Or trying to. My guess. Bar fights. Malcolm gets drunk, starts something, and occasionally finds someone who doesn't know who his daddy is. But the judge always smooths it over, pays people off, makes charges disappear. Why are you telling me this? Dawn met his eyes. Because I have a son too. He's 12. And I think about how easily it could have been him if some monster decided to hurt him. And if that monster's father had enough power to make justice disappear. I've watched the Masons destroy lives for years. Tommy deserves better. He deserves someone who'll fight for him, even if the whole system is rigged. Brett studied her. You understand what I'm planning isn't legal. I don't care about legal. I care about right. And right now, legal and right are 2 different things. She stood, heading for the door. Whatever you do, make it count. Because if you fail, the judge will bury you so deep nobody will find the body. After she left, Brett sat in the darkness, processing the intelligence. He had an audio recording that proved Malcolm's guilt. Inadmissible in court, but useful for other purposes. He had a pattern of abuse spanning years and multiple victims. He had medical records showing Malcolm's own injuries, suggesting the man wasn't invincible. Most importantly, he had confirmation that the Mason family's power came from fear, money, and connections. All things that could be dismantled with the right approach. Brett pulled out a notebook and started writing the way he'd planned operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Every mission required clear objectives, actionable intelligence, and contingency plans. This would be no different. Objective 1. Gather more intelligence on Malcolm and Judge Mason. Find their weaknesses, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. Objective 2. Document everything. Build a case that even corruption couldn't ignore. Objective 3. Find allies. Dawn was one, but he'd need more. People the Masons had wronged. People with motivation to see them fall. Objective 4. Create a situation where Malcolm and his father would destroy themselves. Not just legal consequences, but complete and total ruin. Financial, social, personal. Objective 5. Make sure Tommy was protected throughout. Whatever happened, his son couldn't become collateral damage. Brett worked through the night, creating a tactical plan that would make his commanding officers proud. By dawn, he had a framework. Now he just needed to fill in the details. His phone buzzed. Unknown number again. He answered cautiously. Hayden, is this Brett Hayden? A male voice, older, with a southern drawl. Who's asking? My name is Chester Heath. I'm a private investigator, and I've been looking into Malcolm Mason for a while now. Heard you had a run-in with him. We should talk. Brett's instincts sharpened. Why are you investigating Malcolm? Because I'm being paid to. Rich woman up in Richmond. Married Malcolm for 8 months 2 years ago. Divorced him and wanted dirt for leverage in the settlement. But what I found, let's just say Malcolm Mason is a real piece of work, and his daddy's been cleaning up his messes for decades. You interested in comparing notes? Where and when? Mel's Diner on Route 29. 1 hour. Come alone. The line went dead. Brett checked his watch, grabbed his jacket, and headed out. If Chester Heath was legitimate, he could be a valuable asset. If he was a trap set by the Masons, Brett would deal with it. Either way, he needed more information, and sometimes you had to take calculated risks. The diner was a grease-stained relic from the 1960s, all vinyl booths and checkered floors. Brett arrived early, scoping the location, 2 exits, limited sight lines from outside, mostly empty at this hour. He took a corner booth with a view of the door and waited. Chester Heath walked in 15 minutes later. Late 60s, weathered face like old leather, wearing a rumpled suit and carrying a battered briefcase. Former cop, Brett guessed from the way he moved, aware of his surroundings but not paranoid. He spotted Brett immediately and slid into the opposite side of the booth. "You're younger than I expected," Chester said, signaling the waitress for coffee. "Military, special operations. Just got back from Iraq. Figured. You got that look. I was Army myself back in Vietnam. Long time ago." He accepted the coffee and took a long sip. "So your boy's the latest victim. Tommy, 8 years old, broken spine." Chester's expression darkened. "Jesus, I'm sorry. That man's a goddamn monster, and his father's the devil that keeps him walking free. You said you were investigating Malcolm. What did you find?" Chester opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. 3 years of research. My client wanted everything: financials, criminal history, personal life. She hired me after Malcolm broke her collarbone during an argument. He claimed she fell down drunk, but she was sober and had witnesses. Judge made those witnesses disappear, literally. One left the state, the other suddenly refused to testify, probably got paid off. He spread papers across the table. Malcolm Mason has a pattern. Gets drunk, gets violent, and daddy fixes it. But the judge can't fix everything, and that's where it gets interesting. Malcolm's been bleeding money. Gambling debts, mostly. Owes about 200 grand to some very unpleasant people in Richmond. Brett leaned forward. Bookie named Arturo Bautista. Runs high-stakes poker games and sports betting. Connected to organized crime, but smart enough to stay off the radar. Malcolm's in him deep, and Bautista's getting impatient. Word is, the judge keeps paying off the debt to keep his son's knees unbroken, but there's only so many times you can do that before people start asking questions. So Malcolm has gambling debts his father's covering. What else? Substance abuse. Pills, mostly painkillers. Started after a car accident 5 years ago, legitimate prescription, but he never stopped. Buys them illegally now from a dealer named Blake Burton. I've got photos of transactions, dates, amounts. It's enough to put Malcolm away for possession with intent, if any prosecutor had the balls to charge him. Chester pulled out more documents. Then there's the real estate. Judge Mason owns 18 properties across 3 counties. Rental homes, commercial buildings, a strip mall. All bought with cash, all generating income that's, let's say, creatively reported on tax returns. I bet my pension he's laundering money, probably through those properties. If the IRS ever did a real audit, they'd find enough to put him away for decades. Brett absorbed the information, his tactical mind already working through applications. Why hasn't anyone used this against them? Because anyone who tries gets crushed. The judge has dirt on everyone: cops, prosecutors, other judges, politicians. He spent 30 years collecting leverage. Plus, he's got legitimate power as a district court judge. He can destroy careers, ruin reputations, make people disappear into the legal system. So everybody looks the other way and hopes they never end up on Victor Mason's bad side. But you're willing to share this with me? Why? Chester's jaw tightened. Because Malcolm Mason hurt my granddaughter. The diner seemed to go quiet. Brett waited. For years ago, Chester continued, voice rough. My daughter married a guy who worked for one of the judge's companies. They went to a company party, and Malcolm was there, drunk as usual. My granddaughter was 16. Malcolm cornered her in a bathroom, tried to force himself on her. She fought back, scratched his face, and ran. I reported it to the police. 2 days later, my son-in-law got fired. My daughter's car got vandalized. I started getting threatening calls. Then someone broke into my house while we were at dinner and left a dead cat on my granddaughter's bed with a note. Drop it, or next time it's not the cat. Chester's hands shook with rage. I was a cop for 25 years. Worked homicide, took down some bad people. But I couldn't touch the Masons. So I dropped it, and I've regretted it every goddamn day since. My granddaughter still has nightmares. My family fell apart from the stress. And Malcolm Mason keeps walking around like he owns the world. Brett understood that kind of impotent fury. I'm going to make him pay. Him and his father. I figured. That's why I called you. I can't do this legally. I've tried. But you're military, trained in ways I'm not. And you've got nothing to lose because they already took everything that matters. Chester pushed the folder across the table. Take it. Use it. Burn those bastards to the ground. This could put you at risk. I'm 67 years old with terminal lung cancer. Doctor gives me maybe a year. I'd rather spend it knowing I helped bring the Masons down than waste away wondering what if. Besides, they already made my life hell. What more can they do? Brett took the folder, feeling its weight. This was more than paper. This was ammunition. I'll need time to plan this right. Take what you need. But understand something, Hayden. The judge isn't just corrupt. He's smart. He's been playing this game longer than we've been alive. You go at him half-cocked, he'll destroy you. I don't plan to go at him at all. I'm going to make him destroy himself. Chester smiled grimly. Now you're thinking like a soldier. How can I help? Keep gathering information. I need everything on their associates, who they do business with, who owes them favors, who might flip if given the right motivation. Also, I need to know the judge's schedule, his routine, his vulnerabilities. I can do that. What about Malcolm? Malcolm's my main target, but the judge is the infrastructure. Take down the infrastructure, and Malcolm collapses with it. They talked for another hour, Brett asking questions and Chester providing answers drawn from years of investigation. By the end, Brett had a clearer picture of his enemies. Malcolm Mason was a violent addict with gambling debts and a trail of victims. Judge Victor Mason was a corrupt official who'd built an empire on extortion, money laundering, and judicial manipulation. Together, they were formidable. Separately, they were vulnerable. The key was driving a wedge between them. Brett left the diner with Chester's folder and a new sense of purpose. He had intelligence, he had allies, and he had a target. Now, he needed leverage, something so damaging that even the judge couldn't sweep it under the rug. He spent the afternoon at the public library, using their computers to dig deeper into public records. Property transactions, court cases, business filings, all the paper trails that people assumed nobody would check. Brett had spent years learning to read terrain for tactical advantages. This was just a different kind of terrain. He found something interesting in the business filings. One of the judge's rental properties, a commercial building downtown, had been cited for code violations 3 times in the last year. Faulty electrical, plumbing issues, structural concerns. The violations had been filed by the city inspector, but never followed up. The building was still operating, still renting to tenants, and one of those tenants was a daycare center. Brett felt something click into place. That was it. The judge's Achilles heel wasn't his corruption. It was his reputation. Victor Mason had spent decades cultivating an image as a pillar of the community, a defender of justice, a family man. That image was his power, his armor. But what if that armor cracked? What if the community learned that Judge Mason owned a building with dangerous code violations, and he'd use his influence to prevent enforcement, and that building housed 30 children every day in a daycare center? What if those violations caused an incident? Not one that hurt anyone, but one dramatic enough to make the news, to spark outrage, to make people question how this could happen. Brett started researching the building's history, the code violations, the chain of decisions that kept it operating despite being unsafe. He documented everything, cross-referencing dates and names, building a narrative that would be impossible to deny. This was how you waged unconventional warfare. You found the enemy's center of gravity and attacked it indirectly. You made them lose not through direct confrontation, but through asymmetric pressure. You turned their strengths into weaknesses. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. Stop. Last warning. You won't win. A friend. Brett stared at the message. The Masons knew he was digging. Of course they did. Chester had probably been under surveillance, or maybe Dawn's inquiries had been flagged, or maybe they were just that paranoid. It didn't matter. They were trying to scare him off. They'd made another mistake. They'd revealed their fear. Brett texted back, "Come find me." Then he turned off his phone, packed up his research, and headed back to the motel. Tomorrow, he'd start phase 2, applying pressure. The Masons wanted a war. He'd give them one, but it would be fought on his terms, in ways they couldn't anticipate, with consequences they couldn't escape. He thought about Tommy, lying in that hospital bed, his small body broken by a monster's rage. Brett had made a lot of hard calls in his career, had done things he wasn't proud of to accomplish the mission. But this was different. This was personal. This was for his son, and he would burn the entire Mason empire to ash before he let them walk away unpunished. Brett woke before dawn to someone pounding on his motel door. He rolled out of bed, grabbed his K-bar knife, and approached cautiously. "Who is it?" "Police." "Open up now." He checked through the peephole. 2 officers in uniform, hands near their service weapons. Brett's mind raced. The Masons had made their move faster than expected. He could refuse to open, but that would only escalate things. Better to cooperate, see what they wanted, and adapt. He opened the door. The lead officer, a hard-faced man in his 40s with sergeant stripes, pushed past him into the room. "Brett Hayden." "That's me. We received a report that you've been harassing the Mason family, violating a protective order, and making threats. We're here to bring you in for questioning." Brett kept his voice level. "I haven't violated anything. I've stayed away from the hospital and haven't contacted anyone in the Mason family." The second officer, younger and nervous, was rifling through Brett's belongings. "Sarge, look at this." He held up Chester Heath's folder, spreading papers across the bed. The lead sergeant's expression hardened. "That's confidential information on a sitting judge." "How did you get this?" "It's publicly available records in an investigation by a private detective." "Bullshit. This is stalking and harassment. You're coming with us." They didn't cuff him, which meant this wasn't an official arrest, just intimidation. Brett went along peacefully, knowing that resistance would give them justification to escalate. They drove him to the county sheriff's office, a brick building that smelled like burnt coffee and bureaucracy. He was put in an interrogation room and left alone for 2 hours. Classic technique. Let the suspect stew, get nervous, start second-guessing. But Brett had been through SEER training, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. He'd been trained to resist interrogation by enemies who'd do far worse than leave him in a quiet room. He sat calmly, breathing slowly, running through his tactical plan in his head. Finally, the door opened. But it wasn't a police detective who entered. It was Judge Victor Mason. The judge was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Brett's car. His face was patrician, the kind of handsome that aging wealthy men maintain through good genes and better health care. But his eyes were cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Mr. Hayden." The judge sat down across from him, folding his hands on the metal table. "I'm going to be very clear with you. You're outmatched, outgunned, and out of options. Walk away now, or I will destroy you so completely that your son won't even remember your name." Brett met his stare without flinching. "Your son threw my boy down the stairs and broke his spine. You covered it up, and you think threatening me will make this go away. My son had an unfortunate accident with your son. It's tragic, but these things happen. The authorities investigated and found no wrongdoing. What you're doing now is harassment, and it ends today. The authorities you control." Victor's smile was thin and sharp. "I don't control anyone. I simply have a reputation that people respect. When I tell them something, they tend to believe me because I've never given them reason not to. You, on the other hand, are an unstable veteran with documented PTSD, a history of violence, and a grudge against a respected family. Who do you think people will believe?" Brett felt the trap closing. "I don't have PTSD. Don't you? I have your military medical records right here." Victor pulled out a file. Multiple deployments to combat zones. Witness to numerous casualties. Classified missions involving high-stress situations. Note documented PTSD diagnosis. True, but that's because soldiers like you are trained to suppress symptoms. A competent psychologist would easily diagnose trauma-based behavioral disorders, especially given your recent erratic behavior. What erratic behavior? Breaking into a hospital room to threaten my son, hiring private investigators to stalk my family, compiling secret files with the intent to harass and intimidate. All documented, all witnessed. Victor leaned forward. I can have you committed for psychiatric evaluation. 72 hours minimum, possibly longer if the doctors find you unstable. During that time, I can file for permanent custody of your son, citing your inability to provide safe care. By the time you get out, Tommy will be legally mine. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Brett felt his pulse quicken, but kept his face impassive. This was psychological warfare, and Victor was skilled at it. But Brett had faced down enemy combatants, had negotiated with warlords, had stared at death so many times it became routine. He wouldn't break. You can't manipulate medical records and custody laws that easily, Brett said, even with your connections. Can I? I've been a judge for 23 years. I know every lawyer, every court clerk, every social worker in this county. I've placed probation officers, recommended therapists, influenced placements. The entire system runs on trust and relationships, and I have both in abundance. You have neither. Victor stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave Virginia today. Go back to the military. Go anywhere else, I don't care. But you're going to sign papers relinquishing your parental rights to your ex-wife and my son. In exchange, I'll make sure Tommy gets the best medical care money can buy. He'll recover as much as possible, and he'll have a good life. With the man who crippled him, accidents happen. Malcolm will be more careful in the future. But Tommy needs stability, not a father who's plotting revenge fantasies and stalking his family. Brett's hands clenched under the table. And if I refuse, then I destroy you. I'll have you arrested for violating the protective order. I can manufacture evidence if needed. I'll leak information about your military service, spin it to make you look like a dangerous veteran. I'll have you declared mentally unfit and institutionalized. And while you're locked up and powerless, I'll take Tommy and you'll never see him again. Victor's smile widened. Or, if you become too much of a problem, accidents happen to more than just children. You could disappear, die in a tragic incident, and nobody would question it. Another veteran who couldn't cope with civilian life. Very sad. The threat of murder hung in the air. Brett realized he'd underestimated Victor Mason. This wasn't just corruption. This was a man who'd been eliminating threats for decades, who viewed human life as a resource to be managed or discarded. I need time to think, Brett said. You have until noon tomorrow. After that, I assume you've chosen the hard way, and I act accordingly. Victor walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. That private investigator, Chester Heath, he's going to have a very unfortunate accident involving his car and a drunk driver. Probably tonight. And that nurse, Dawn Hand, she'll find herself facing disciplinary action for HIPAA violations and lose her license. Those are just warning shots. Anyone who helps you will be dealt with. You're alone, Mr. Hayden. Accept that and move on. The door closed, and Brett was left in the interrogation room. Alone, outmaneuvered, checkmated. Or was he? Brett closed his eyes and thought. Victor Mason had just made his own critical mistake. He'd revealed too much. His methods, his reach, his willingness to commit murder. He'd done it to intimidate, to show his power. But in doing so, he'd given Brett something valuable. Confirmation that Victor was desperate. If Victor was truly untouchable, he wouldn't need to threaten. He'd just make Brett disappear and be done with it. But Victor was offering a deal, which meant there were limits to his power. Lines he couldn't cross without risking exposure. Killing a decorated military veteran would draw attention, especially if that veteran had been asking questions about corruption. It would invite federal scrutiny, maybe even trigger a review of Victor's judicial conduct. Victor wanted Brett to go quietly because a fight was dangerous, not just for Brett, but for Victor too. That was the weakness. Victor's entire empire was built on perception. People believed in him because he projected power and respectability. But if that perception cracked, if people started questioning his integrity, the whole structure could collapse. Brett opened his eyes. He wasn't outmatched. He was exactly where he needed to be. After another hour, a different officer opened the door. "You're free to go." The judge decided not to press charges this time. "But you need to leave town by tomorrow." Brett stood and walked out, collecting his belongings at the front desk. They'd kept Chester's folder, evidence, they claimed. But Brett had photographed every page last night and uploaded copies to an encrypted cloud server. He never went into a situation with only one copy of critical intel. Outside, the morning sun was harsh and bright. Brett pulled out his phone and found 3 missed calls from Dawn and 2 texts from an unknown number, "Leave now" and "Final warning." He ignored them and dialed instead. Eric Sandoval answered on the second ring. "Brett, how's your son?" "Not good, Captain. I need a favor." "Name it." "I need you to contact JAG, the Judge Advocate General's office. Tell them I'm a service member being threatened and extorted by a corrupt civilian judge who's interfering with my parental rights. I need federal intervention, or at least the threat of it." Eric was quiet for a moment. "That's serious, Brett. You sure about this? A sitting federal judge just threatened to have me killed." "I'm sure." "Jesus. Okay, I'll make the call. But it'll take time to get the military bureaucracy moving, maybe weeks." "That's fine. I just need them looking in this direction. Even a preliminary inquiry will make Victor Mason nervous." "Done. Anything else?" "Yeah. Remember when we pulled out that CIA asset from Mosul? The guy who'd infiltrated the insurgent network and was feeding us intel. What about him? He told us once that the best way to destroy an organization isn't to cut off the head. It's to make the members stop trusting each other. Paranoia destroys from within." "Brett, what are you planning?" "Asymmetric warfare. Same as we did overseas, just different terrain." Eric sighed. "Don't do anything that'll land you in Leavenworth. I'm just gathering information and exercising my First Amendment rights. Perfectly legal." "Uh-huh. Call me if you need backup." "Thanks, Captain." Brett hung up and headed back to the motel. He had less than 24 hours before Victor's deadline. Time to accelerate the operation. He spent the afternoon creating multiple social media accounts under fake names, then began posting carefully worded questions on local community forums. "Does anyone know if the daycare on Main Street is safe? I heard there were code violations." And, "What's the deal with Judge Mason's rental properties? My friend rented one and said the wiring was dangerous." And, "Has anyone else had problems with the police not investigating crimes when powerful families are involved?" The posts were subtle, designed to plant seeds of doubt without making accusations. Within hours, people started responding, some dismissing it as gossip, but others adding their own stories of encounters with the Mason family's influence. The algorithm did the rest, spreading the conversation across interconnected communities. Then Brett contacted 3 local news stations, anonymously sending them the code violation reports on the judge's building and asking why these violations hadn't been enforced. 2 stations ignored him. The third, a young, ambitious reporter named Judy McLean, bit. She called the number Brett had provided. "This is Judy McLean with Channel 7. "Who am I speaking with?" "A concerned citizen. Did you get the documents I sent?" "Yeah. Building code violations on a property owned by Judge Mason." "Why are you sending me this?" "Because those violations put 30 children at risk every day, and nobody's doing anything about it. That building should be red tagged until repairs are made. But the city inspector stopped following up after the judge made a few calls. I thought the public might want to know. This is a serious accusation. Can you go on record?" "Not yet. But if you investigate the paper trail, contact the building inspector, check the city's enforcement records, interview the daycare owner, you'll find everything checks out. And once you start asking questions, you'll find people willing to talk." "Why are you doing this?" Brett paused. "Because someone I love got hurt, and the person responsible walked away because his father is powerful. I'm tired of powerful people escaping consequences." Judy was quiet for a moment. "Give me your number. I'll look into this and call you back." Brett provided a burner phone number and hung up. He just lit the first fire. Now he needed to light more before Victor could put them out. Next, he called Arturo Bautista's number, the bookie Malcolm owed money to. A gruff voice answered. "Yeah. Is this Arturo Bautista? I have information about Malcolm Mason. Who's this? Someone with a shared interest in seeing Malcolm pay his debts. I understand he owes you about $200,000. That's my business. It is. But what if I told you Judge Mason has been planning to use his influence to shut down your operation? He sees you as a threat because Malcolm can't stop gambling away money, and eventually that's going to cause problems for the judge's reputation. I've seen documents, warrants being prepared, surveillance being planned. You're about to be raided. This was a bluff, but a calculated one. Victor would absolutely throw Arturo under the bus if it protected Malcolm. Arturo's voice sharpened. What documents? I can't share them directly. Too risky. But you might want to make sure Malcolm pays up immediately before the judge decides to solve the problem by eliminating you instead. Just a friendly warning. Brett hung up. That would put pressure on Malcolm from a different direction. Criminal pressure that even Victor couldn't easily deflect. By evening, Brett had planted seeds of chaos throughout the Mason Empire. Anonymous tips to the IRS about the judge's property holdings. Questions posted on legal forums about Victor's old prosecutorial misconduct cases. Emails to state judicial oversight committees suggesting they review Victor's recent rulings for bias. None of it was enough to bring the Masons down on its own. But together, it created a picture of scrutiny, of attention being paid, of walls closing in. And people like Victor Mason, who thrived in shadows, hated being in the spotlight. Brett's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Hayden, you stupid son of a bitch. Malcolm Mason's voice, slurred and furious. You think you can hide behind your computer and fuck with my family? I'm coming for you. I'm at the Riverside Motel, room 12. I'll be waiting. Malcolm hung up. Brett checked his watch, 7:47 p.m. If Malcolm was drunk enough to make threats over the phone, he was drunk enough to do something stupid. And stupid was exactly what Brett needed. He spent the next hour preparing the room. Moved the bed to create open space. Set up his phone on the dresser, angled to capture the entire room, recording. Unlocked the door but left it closed. Then he sat on the chair, facing the entrance, and waited. Malcolm arrived 20 minutes later. Brett heard the unsteady footsteps, the fumbling with the door handle. The door burst open, and Malcolm Mason filled the frame. Bigger than Brett remembered, his face flushed with alcohol and rage, his suit rumpled. You, Malcolm pointed at Brett, swaying slightly. You've been spreading lies about my family. You think you can ruin us. Brett stayed seated, calm. I haven't spread any lies. Just facts. Facts? Facts! Malcolm lurched into the room, leaving the door open. My father could have had you killed. I wanted him to. But he said no. Said we'd handle it legal. Well, fuck legal. I'm handling it my way. He lunged at Brett. In his prime, Malcolm might have been formidable. He had size and weight. But he was drunk, slow, and used to victims who didn't fight back. Brett wasn't a victim. Brett moved. 8 years of hand-to-hand combat training, countless hours of Krav Maga and mixed martial arts. Muscle memory drilled into his bones. He sidestepped Malcolm's clumsy charge, caught his arm, and used his momentum to send him crashing into the wall. Malcolm roared, spun, and swung a wild haymaker. Brett ducked, drove a fist into Malcolm's solar plexus, and followed with an elbow to the jaw. Malcolm dropped to one knee, gasping. That's for Tommy, Brett said quietly. Malcolm looked up, blood dripping from his split lip, and laughed. A broken, bitter sound. You think you're so tough? You think you won? My father will bury you. He's done it before. You're nothing. I know. That's why I made sure someone was watching. Malcolm's eyes widened as Brett gestured to the open door. Standing in the doorway, phone out and recording, was Judy McLean, the reporter from Channel 7. Behind her stood Dawn Hand and Chester Heath. Malcolm scrambled to his feet, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. He collapsed against the bed, looking suddenly pathetic instead of threatening. Judy stepped into the room, her phone's camera still recording. Malcolm Mason, I'm Judy McLean with Channel 7 News. You just assaulted a man in front of witnesses. Would you like to comment? Malcolm's face went white, then red, then white again. Turn that off. Turn it off right now, or I'll... You'll what? Assault me too? Please do. I'd love the ratings. Judy kept filming. We're also investigating your father's properties, specifically building code violations that have been ignored. Care to comment on that?" Malcolm lurched toward her, but Brett stepped between them. "Don't." For a moment, Malcolm looked like he might try anyway. Then he seemed to deflate, all the drunken bravado draining out of him. "You're dead. All of you. My father will destroy you." "He could try," Chester said from the doorway. "But we've got this on video, we've got witnesses, and we've got documentation of your family's corruption going back years. The world's about to find out who the Masons really are." Malcolm staggered out of the room, nearly falling down the stairs. They heard his car start. Brett made a mental note to call the police anonymously about a drunk driver in a black Mercedes and roar away into the night. Judy lowered her phone. That was reckless. If he'd had a weapon, you could have been killed. But he didn't. Malcolm's a bully, not a fighter. Bullies don't expect resistance. "I'll have this on the air tomorrow night. Are you willing to go on record now?" Brett nodded. "My name is Brett Hayden. I'm a special operations soldier. And 3 days ago, Malcolm Mason threw my 8-year-old son down the stairs and broke his spine. Judge Victor Mason used his influence to cover it up and threatened to have me killed if I didn't walk away. I'm not walking away, and it's time everyone knew what this family has been doing." Judy interviewed him for 30 minutes, getting the full story on camera. Then she interviewed Dawn, who confirmed the medical details and Malcolm's bragging about being untouchable. Chester provided context about the judge's corruption and his own investigation. By the time they finished, it was past midnight, and they had enough material for a damning expose. "This goes live tomorrow at 6, Judy said. "Once it airs, there's no going back. The judge will come after all of us." "Let him try," Brett said. "We're not alone anymore." And that's what he fears most. After they left, Brett sat alone in the motel room, reviewing the footage on his phone. Malcolm assaulting him, making threats, confirming Brett's accusations. It wasn't enough to put the Masons in prison. Not yet. But it was enough to crack Victor's armor of respectability. Tomorrow, the whole county would see the truth. The judge could pressure some people, threaten others, but he couldn't silence everyone. And once the public started questioning, once federal authorities got involved, once the media smelled blood in the water, the Mason empire would crumble. Brett thought about Tommy in his hospital bed. His son deserved better than a world where monsters walked free because their fathers had power. Tommy deserved justice, and justice was coming. The news segment aired at 6 p.m. the following evening. By 6:02, Brett's phone was exploding with calls and texts. By 6:15, the video had been shared across social media hundreds of times. By 6:30, Judge Victor Mason's office released a statement calling the story defamatory lies spread by a disgruntled veteran with mental health issues. But the damage was done. Judy McLean's report had been thorough and damning. She'd interviewed the building inspector, who confirmed the code violations and admitted, on camera, that he'd been told to back off by someone in the judge's office. She'd spoken with 2 former tenants of Mason properties who described dangerous conditions and intimidation when they tried to complain. She'd gotten a lawyer to review the protective order against Brett and point out irregularities in how quickly it had been filed and approved. Most devastatingly, she'd aired Malcolm's assault on Brett. Watching Malcolm threaten and attack someone while drunk, hearing him brag about his father's power, seeing him flee when confronted, it destroyed the image of respectability the Masons had cultivated. The judge's statement only made things worse. Calling Brett mentally ill backfired when viewers saw him calmly answering questions, articulate and composed. It made Victor look desperate. By the next morning, 3 other news stations had picked up the story. The local paper ran a front-page article with a headline, "Judge's Son Accused of Assault." Questions raised about judicial misconduct. Social media was ablaze with people sharing their own stories about the Mason family's abuse of power. Brett was eating breakfast at a diner when his phone rang. Colonel Schultz. "Hayden, what the hell did you do?" "What I had to, sir. Jag called me. They're opening an investigation into Judge Mason's interference with your parental rights." The media attention forced their hand. And get this, the FBI just announced they're reviewing Mason's financial records for potential money laundering. Somebody dropped a very detailed tip in their inbox. Brett smiled. That's good news, sir. That's insane news. You just declared war on one of the most powerful men in Virginia. You better hope you've got enough ammunition to finish this. I do. All right. But watch your back. Cornered animals are dangerous. Brett hung up and returned his coffee. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, refilled his cup without being asked. You're that soldier, aren't you? From a news. Yes, ma'am. My sister's grandson went to that daycare in the judge's building. She's terrified now, thinking about what could have happened. Thank you for speaking up. Somebody needed to. I'm just trying to protect my son. You're doing more than that. You're protecting all of us. She walked away, and Brett felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Not for himself, but for the community. For everyone who'd been too afraid to stand up to the Masons. He'd given them permission to speak, and now the floodgates were opening. His phone buzzed. Text from Chester. Bautista just showed up at Malcolm's house with 3 large men. Might want to watch this. Brett drove to the address Chester provided, a wealthy subdivision with million-dollar homes behind iron gates. He parked down the street, using binoculars to observe Malcolm's house. Sure enough, Arturo Bautista and 3 enforcers were on the front porch, pounding on the door. Malcolm appeared, looking haggard. Even from this distance, Brett could see the argument escalate. Bautista was shouting, gesturing aggressively. Malcolm tried to close the door, but one of the enforcers jammed his foot in the way. More shouting. Then Bautista pulled out a phone and showed Malcolm something, probably gambling debts or photographic evidence of losses. Malcolm's shoulders slumped. He retreated into the house and returned minutes later with a briefcase, presumably full of cash. Bautista took it, counted quickly, then shook his head. Not enough. More arguing. Finally, Malcolm signed something, probably a new IOU or promissory note, and Bautista left. Brett lowered the binoculars. The financial pressure was working. Malcolm was bleeding money, and Victor couldn't protect him from everyone. The Masons' empire was built on fear and favors, but when people stopped being afraid, the favors ran out. Next, Brett drove to the courthouse. A crowd had gathered outside. Protesters with signs reading "Justice for Tommy" and "Hold judges accountable," and "No one above the law." So were parents from the daycare. Others were people the Masons had wronged over the years. There was even a contingent of veterans, standing in silent solidarity. Brett didn't approach them. This wasn't about making himself a hero, but seeing them there, refusing to be silent, refusing to let corruption hide. It meant something. Inside the courthouse, chaos reigned. Brett watched from the public gallery as lawyers hurried through hallways. Clerks whispered urgently, and a very nervous-looking court administrator fielded phone calls from journalists. Judge Victor Mason's courtroom was closed. Emergency docket review, the sign claimed. But Brett knew what was really happening. Victor was scrambling, calling in favors, threatening enemies, trying to contain the wildfire Brett had started. The judge was powerful, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. And while he focused on the media and the FBI investigation, Brett was working on a different front. He met with a lawyer named Jeffrey Barr, a crusading civil rights attorney who'd been looking for a way to challenge the Mason family for years. Jeffrey was in his 50s, gray-haired and passionate, with a file cabinet full of complaints against Victor that had gone nowhere. "This is our shot," Jeffrey said, spreading documents across his desk. "The Judicial Oversight Committee has to investigate now that there's public pressure. And with the FBI looking at his finances, we can file ethics complaints that'll actually be reviewed. But I need you to testify, Brett. Officially, on the record." "I will. But I want more than ethics violations. I want Malcolm in prison. That's harder. Assault charges require the prosecutor to file, and the county prosecutor is Victor's friend. But Jeffrey pulled out a different file. What if we go federal? Ow! Civil rights violation. Malcolm assaulted your son, and local authorities conspire to deprive you of equal protection under the law based on Victor's influence. That's a federal offense. It brings in federal prosecutors who don't answer to Victor. And if we can prove a pattern, other victims who were denied justice, it becomes a racketeering case under RICO statutes." Brett's mind raced. How many other victims do we need? 3 or 4 solid cases would do it. People willing to testify that Malcolm hurt them or their children, and that the judge interfered with investigations. I can get you more than that. Brett spent the next 2 days tracking down victims. He started with the names Chester had provided: Malcolm's ex-wife who'd fled the state, the girlfriend who'd filed assault charges, the woman Chester had been investigating for. Some refused to talk, still terrified of the Masons. But others, emboldened by the news coverage and the protests, agreed to come forward. He found 5 victims willing to testify. 4 adults Malcolm had assaulted during drunken rages. 1 child, Chester's granddaughter, whom Malcolm had attempted to sexually assault. Each had tried to seek justice and been shut down by Victor's interference. Together, their testimony painted a picture of systematic corruption and predation. Jeffrey filed the federal complaint on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, the U.S. Attorney's Office had issued a statement. They were opening a formal investigation into civil rights violations and judicial corruption in the Mason family's conduct. That's when Victor Mason made his move. Brett was leaving his motel when 2 black SUVs pulled up, boxing him in. 6 men emerged. Not police, not FBI. Private security, the kind that didn't ask questions. The lead man, built like a linebacker with dead eyes, approached Brett. "Mr. Hayden, Judge Mason would like a word. Please come with us. And if I refuse, we're authorized to use necessary force. But the judge hopes you'll be reasonable." Brett calculated his options. 6 trained men with weapons versus himself. He could fight, maybe take down 2 or 3, but they'd overwhelm him. And fighting would give Victor justification to paint him as violent and unstable. Better to see what Victor wanted. "Let's go." They drove him to a mansion on the outskirts of town. The Mason family estate, a sprawling colonial-style home behind high walls and security gates. Brett was escorted inside to a study that reeked of old money and older power. Judge Victor Mason sat behind an antique desk, looking every bit the patriarch defending his kingdom. "Mr. Hayden, please sit." Brett remained standing. "You had me kidnapped to have a conversation?" "Invited. Let's not be dramatic. And you've been spreading so many lies about my family. I thought it time we spoke face to face, without lawyers or cameras. Everything I've said is true. Is it?" Victor stood, pouring himself bourbon from a crystal decanter. "Let's examine the facts. You're a soldier who's been away from his son for years. You come home to find a tragic accident has occurred. Rather than trust the legal system, you launch a vendetta against a respected family based on a nurse's phone call, a private investigator's conspiracy theories, based on evidence, based on Malcolm's history of violence, based on your corruption." Victor took a sip of bourbon, savoring it. History, evidence, corruption, such weighty words. But here's the reality, Mr. Hayden. You created a great deal of noise, stirred up public sentiment, got federal agencies sniffing around. And for what? Your son is still broken. Malcolm is still free. And I'm still a sitting judge. For now. Forever. Victor's voice hardened. "You think I'm afraid of investigations? I've been investigated before. They find nothing because there's nothing to find. I'm meticulous. Every property purchase is documented. Every financial transaction is clean. Yes, I have influence. That's what happens when you serve justice faithfully for decades. People trust you. People owe you favors. That's not corruption. That's leadership. And Malcolm? What about his victims? Malcolm has problems. I won't deny that. But he's my son, and I protect what's mine. That's what fathers do." Victor moved closer, his presence filling the room. "Which brings us to the real issue. You're father too. You want to protect Tommy. So do I. He's my grandson, after all. I'm paying for his medical care, the best doctors money can buy. I want him to recover. He shouldn't need recovery. He should be healthy and safe. Accidents happen. But moving forward, I can ensure Tommy has everything he needs. The finest schools, the best opportunities, a trust fund that'll support him for life. All you have to do is walk away. Sign over custody to Sheila. Accept a financial settlement, and disappear back into your military career. You'll have one. In a sense, Tommy will be protected, cared for, and you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you fought for him. Except Malcolm goes unpunished. Malcolm will be handled. I'll send him to a rehabilitation facility, keep him away from Tommy. He won't harm anyone else. Brett studied the judge. Victor believed what he was saying. That was the dangerous part. He genuinely thought he could manage his son, control the situation, make everything return to normal through the application of power and money. He didn't see the rot at the core of his empire, didn't understand that some crimes couldn't be balanced by wealth or influence. No, Brett said. Victor's expression hardened. No, no deal. Malcolm belongs in prison. You belong off the bench. And Tommy deserves to know his father didn't sell him out for money. Then you're a fool. Victor set down his glass with a sharp crack. You think because you got some media attention and filed complaints that you've won? I've destroyed better men than you. I'll have you declared mentally unfit, locked in a psychiatric facility, and Tommy will grow up thinking his father was a crazy veteran who abandoned him. That's your legacy if you continue this crusade. Do it. Make me a martyr. See how that plays in the press when the FBI's already investigating you. Victor's eyes narrowed. You really want to die on this hill? I've died on actual hills. This is easier. For a long moment, the judge stared at Brett. Then he smiled, cold and predatory. You know what? I'm going to enjoy breaking you. I've dealt with crusaders before. They all break eventually. Everyone has a price or a pressure point. I'll find yours. You already found it. Tommy. And that's why I'm not stopping. Victor pressed a button on his desk, and the security team entered. Escort Mr. Hayden out. And make sure he understands that if he comes near my property again, I'll have him arrested for trespassing. As Brett was let out, Victor called after him. 1 week, Mr. Hayden. You have 1 week to reconsider before I unleash everything I have. Think about your son. Think about whether your pride is worth his future. Brett didn't respond. He'd said everything that needed saying. They drove him back to his motel and dumped him in the parking lot. Brett sat in his car for a while, processing the encounter. Victor had made 2 things clear. He was scared enough to make threats, but arrogant enough to believe he'd still win. That combination of fear and arrogance was a vulnerability. Brett called Jeffrey Barr. The judge just had me kidnapped and threatened. I need you to file an emergency motion documenting this and requesting federal protection. Jesus, Brett, are you okay? I'm fine, but we need to keep applying pressure. Victor's starting to crack. Okay, I'll file it tomorrow. But Brett, watch your back. If the judge is threatening you directly, he's desperate. And desperate men do desperate things. Brett hung up and went inside. His phone buzzed immediately. Text from an unknown number. You were warned. Now you pay. He deleted the message and started running through contingency plans. If Victor was escalating to direct threats and intimidation, the next move might be violence. Brett needed to be ready. He spent that evening securing his position, moved to a different motel under a fake name, sent copies of all his evidence to multiple secure locations, cloud servers, trusted friends, Jeffrey's office, wrote detailed letters explaining everything he knew about the Masons and sealed them with instructions to be opened if anything happened to him. Then he did something he'd never done in 8 years of military service. He called his mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. Brett? Oh my God, I saw the news. Are you all right? How's Tommy? Tommy's stable. I'm okay. But Mom, I need to tell you something in case things go wrong. He explained everything. The assault, the cover-up, his investigation, the threats. His mother, a retired school teacher with a spine of steel, listened without interrupting. Brett Anthony Hayden, she said when he finished. You're going to beat these bastards. Do you hear me? You're going to win because you're fighting for something that matters, and they're just fighting to protect their ability to hurt people. Good beats evil. It has to. That's a nice sentiment, Mom, but nothing. I raise you to be strong and smart and good. Trust those things, and know that if anything happens to you, I'll finish what you started. Nobody hurts my grandson and gets away with it. Brett felt his throat tighten. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. Now, go make those Masons pay. He hung up feeling strangely lighter. Whatever happened next, he wasn't alone. He had allies, evidence, and a cause worth fighting for. Victor Mason had power, but power built on corruption was ultimately brittle. It could be shattered. The next morning brought news. The daycare in Victor's building had been shut down by the city after the fire marshal declared it unsafe. Parents were furious, demanding to know why this hadn't been done sooner. The building inspector who'd admitted to backing off was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. Then the IRS announced a formal audit of Victor Mason's properties and financial records. The FBI expanded their investigation to include potential RICO charges, and the Judicial Oversight Committee scheduled a hearing to review Victor's conduct. The walls were closing in. Malcolm cracked first. Brett was driving past a bar downtown when he saw Malcolm's Mercedes parked outside, haphazard and taking up 2 spaces. It was 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, day drinking, probably trying to escape the mounting pressure. Brett parked and went inside. The bar was dim and nearly empty, just a bartender and Malcolm hunched over the counter, 3 empty glasses in front of him. Brett sat 2 stools away. Malcolm looked up, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. "You. Of course it's you. We need to talk, Malcolm." "Fuck you. You destroyed everything." Malcolm's words slurred together. "My father's being investigated. I owe Bautista $500,000 now. Sheila won't even look at me. All because of one stupid kid who couldn't stay out of my way." Brett's hands clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "That stupid kid is my son, and you broke his spine. It was an accident. I didn't mean—" Malcolm's voice broke. "I was drunk. I've been drunk for years. Everything's just— I don't know how I got like this. I used to be somebody. I was going to be a lawyer, make my father proud. But I couldn't pass the bar, couldn't hold a job, couldn't do anything right. So I drank, and it made things easier. Except it didn't. It made everything worse." For a moment, Brett almost felt something like pity. Malcolm was pathetic, broken, drowning in his own failures. But then he thought about Tommy lying in that hospital bed, and the pity evaporated. "Turn yourself in," Brett said. "Confess. Testify against your father. Maybe you'll get a lighter sentence. Maybe you can start over in a few years. But this path you're on, it ends with you in prison or dead." Malcolm laughed bitterly. "Prison or dead. Yeah, that's all I've got left." He downed another shot. "My father said he'd protect me. He always said that. But he can't anymore, can he? You made sure of that. Your father protected you so you could keep hurting people. That's not love. That's enabling. What the hell do you know about my father? I know he values power more than you. And when it comes down to protecting himself or protecting you, he'll sacrifice you without hesitation." Malcolm was quiet for a long time. Then he stood, swaying. "I need to go. Malcolm, leave me alone." He stumbled toward the exit, nearly falling. Brett watched him go, wondering if Malcolm would actually turn himself in or if he'd just drink himself into oblivion. The answer came later that night. Brett was back at his motel when sirens wailed past. He turned on the news and saw live footage of Malcolm's house engulfed in flames. Firefighters were battling the blaze, but it was clearly too late. The mansion was being consumed, black smoke pouring into the night sky. The reporter's voice was grim. "We're receiving unconfirmed reports that Malcolm Mason was inside when the fire started. Emergency responders are on scene, but the intense flames have prevented entry. The cause of the fire is unknown at this time." Brett watched, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Part of him thought Malcolm deserved worse. But another part, the part that had seen too much death, too much destruction, felt only sadness that it had ended this way. The reporter continued, "We've just received confirmation from the fire chief. They've recovered a body from the residence, believed to be Malcolm Mason. Cause of death will be determined by the medical examiner, but sources tell us they found multiple empty pill bottles and alcohol containers near the body. Authorities are investigating this as a possible suicide." Brett turned off the TV. Malcolm had taken the coward's way out, escaping justice through death. But in doing so, he'd also escaped his father's control. Maybe that was the only victory Malcolm could achieve. His phone rang. "Jeffrey Barr, did you see the news?" "Yeah. This changes things, Brett. With Malcolm dead, the assault case gets complicated. We can still pursue the civil rights violations against the judge, but the direct target is gone. Malcolm was never the main target. Victor is. Malcolm was just the symptom. The judge is the disease." "Agreed. And now we have an opening." With Malcolm dead, Victor's lost his primary reason to fight so hard. He was protecting his son. Now he's just protecting himself, which means he's more dangerous or more vulnerable. We'll see. Brett hung up and sat in the darkness, thinking. Malcolm's death had shifted the battlefield. Victor would mourn in public, play the grieving father, use sympathy as armor. But privately, he'd be calculating how to use this to his advantage. The war wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. Judge Victor Mason buried his son on a gray Saturday morning, with half the county's elite in attendance. Brett watched from a distance, standing on a hill overlooking the cemetery, using binoculars to observe the funeral. Victor stood ramrod straight beside the casket, his face carved from stone, showing no emotion. Sheila was there too, heavily sedated by the look of her, supported by two women Brett didn't recognize. The funeral was a performance, Victor Mason playing the role of devoted father devastated by tragedy. But Brett knew better. He'd seen the same tactic used by warlords in Iraq: turn a loss into propaganda, use sympathy as a shield against accountability. The media ate it up. Suddenly, the narrative shifted from corrupt judge and violent son to grieving father who lost everything. Opinion pieces appeared defending Victor, claiming the stress of Brett's campaign had driven Malcolm to suicide. Conservative outlets painted Brett as a vengeful veteran who destroyed a family. Liberal outlets urged compassion for mental health and addiction. Public opinion, which had been turning against the Masons, now wavered. The protests outside the courthouse dwindled. People started questioning whether Brett had gone too far. Jeffrey called with bad news. The Judicial Oversight Committee postponed the hearing, so it would be inappropriate to proceed while Victor's grieving. The FBI's still investigating, but they're being careful not to look like they're piling on a man who just lost his son. So we're back to square one. Not quite. We still have the federal civil rights complaint, and the IRS audit is proceeding. But momentum slowed. Victor's using Malcolm's death brilliantly. He's the victim now, not the villain. Brett understood the tactic. It was classic asymmetric warfare. When you can't win on the battlefield, win in the court of public opinion. Victor was better at this than Brett had anticipated. But Brett had learned something crucial over 8 years in special operations. When your enemy adapts, you adapt faster. He called Chester Heath. How complete is your investigation into the judge's finances? Complete enough. I've got paper trails on property purchases, suspicious cash transactions, and patterns that suggest money laundering. But it's all circumstantial. We need someone on the inside to confirm it. What about the judge's law practice? He ran a firm for years before becoming a judge. Mason and Associates. He still maintains it, supposedly retired but actually pulling strings. Why? Because law firms keep detailed records. Personnel files, case files, financial records. If the judge was corrupt as a prosecutor, he was corrupt as a defense attorney too. We just need to find someone who worked there and is willing to talk. Chester was quiet for a moment. I might know someone. Former paralegal named Ellen Davis. Worked for Victor for 15 years, left about 5 years ago. She filed a wrongful termination lawsuit, but it got settled and sealed. I tried to contact her for my investigation, but she wouldn't talk. Why'd she leave? Rumor is she found something she shouldn't have. The judge paid her a lot of money to keep quiet and disappear. Track her down. Offer her protection and immunity in exchange for testimony. If she knows where the bodies are buried, she's our key to bringing Victor down. Brett, she's been silent for 5 years. Why would she talk now? Because Malcolm's dead. Whatever leverage Victor had over her might have died with him. And because people have limits to how much injustice they can stomach. We just need to remind her that staying silent makes her complicit. Chester agreed to try. While he worked that angle, Brett focused on another front. Sheila. His ex-wife was the wild card. She defended Malcolm, supported Victor, but Brett had seen the fear in her eyes at the hospital. Malcolm's death had freed her from an abusive relationship, even if she hadn't admitted it was abusive. Maybe now, with Malcolm gone and Victor vulnerable, she'd be willing to tell the truth. Brett drove to the house Sheila had shared with Malcolm, the same house that had burned. She was staying at a hotel now, according to Dawn's intel. Brett waited in the parking lot until he saw her emerge, looking gaunt and exhausted. Sheila, she froze, then turned slowly. Brett, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you. About Tommy. About Malcolm. About what really happened. Her face crumbled. I can't. Victor said I shouldn't talk to you. The lawyers said. Sheila, Malcolm's dead. Victor's losing his grip. And Tommy's lying in a hospital bed, possibly paralyzed for life because you chose to protect a monster instead of our son. Tears streamed down her face. You don't understand. Malcolm wasn't always like that. When I met him, he was charming, successful. He said he loved me, loved Tommy. I thought we'd have a real family. When did he start hurting you? 3 months after the wedding. He'd drink and get angry. Never hit me, just grabbed too hard, pushed me, yelled. And I told myself it was the alcohol, that he'd get better. Then he started with Tommy. Little things at first. Harsh punishments for minor mistakes, making him stand in the corner for hours, taking away food as discipline. I tried to intervene, but Malcolm said I was too soft. That boy's needed discipline. And the stairs. Sheila sobbed. Tommy spilled juice on some papers Malcolm needed for a court case. Malcolm went crazy. He dragged Tommy to the stairs, and I tried to stop him, but he pushed me away. I heard Tommy screaming, and then silence. When I got to the bottom, Tommy wasn't moving. And you told the police it was an accident. Victor was there within an hour. He said if I told the truth, he'd make sure I lost custody of Tommy, that I'd be charged with neglect for not protecting him. He said Malcolm would go to rehab, that it would never happen again. I was terrified, Brett. I was so scared of losing Tommy that I lied. And now I've lost Malcolm, and Tommy might never walk again, and it's all my fault. Brett fought to keep his voice level. It's not your fault. Malcolm did this. Victor enabled it. But you can still make it right. Testify. Tell the truth. Help me make sure the judge pays for what he's done. He'll destroy me. You've seen what he does to people who cross him. He's already destroyed you, Sheila. You've lost your husband, your home, and your son's trust. The only way to get any of that back is to do the right thing. She looked at him, broken and desperate. What do I have to do? Tell the FBI everything. How Malcolm abused Tommy. How Victor covered up. How he threatened you. They're building a RICO case, and your testimony could be the final piece. Sheila nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it. For Tommy. Brett drove her to the FBI field office in Richmond. Special Agent Terrence Washburn met them. A middle-aged black man with sharp eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen it all. He listened to Sheila's story, asked pointed questions, and took notes. Mrs. Mason, what you're describing is obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy to deprive civil rights. If you testify to this, you'll be a key witness. But you'll also be implicating yourself in the cover-up. I know. I'll accept whatever consequences come. I just want to do right by my son. Washburn nodded. All right. We'll arrange for your formal statement and place you in protective custody until the trial. Judge Mason has resources, and he won't be happy about this. After Sheila was taken to a safe house, Washburn turned to Brett. Mr. Hayden, you've been busy. We've been investigating the judge for weeks now, but you've done more in days than we've accomplished in months. I have motivation, so I've noticed, between your ex-wife's testimony, the financial evidence we're compiling, and the pattern of corruption we're documenting, we might actually be able to charge him. But I need you to back off now. Let's handle this officially. Will it be enough? I think so. The RICO statute requires proving a pattern of criminal activity. We've got witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and evidence of money laundering through his properties. Your ex-wife's testimony ties it all together. Shows that this wasn't isolated incidents, but a systematic pattern of using his position to protect his son and himself. Brett nodded. How long until you move on him? Weeks, maybe a month. These things take time, but we'll get him. Brett left the FBI office feeling cautiously optimistic. The machinery of justice was finally moving, grinding slowly but inexorably toward Victor Mason. But he knew Victor wouldn't go down without a fight. That fight came sooner than expected. 2 days after Sheila's testimony, Brett received a package at his new motel. No return address, just his name written in neat script. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. Watch this alone. Then decide if your crusade is worth the cost. Brett plugged the flash drive into his laptop. A video file appeared, labeled insurance. He clicked play. The footage was grainy, surveillance quality, showing a nondescript room. Two men entered. One was clearly interrogating the other, who was tied to a chair and badly beaten. The interrogator's face was never fully visible, but his voice was unmistakable, Brett's own voice. Except Brett had never been in that room, had never interrogated anyone like this. The video was fake, but expertly done, using deepfake technology to map Brett's face and voice onto someone else. The interrogation turned violent. The bound man screamed as the fake Brett beat him, demanded information, and ultimately killed him with bare hands. The timestamp on the video was 3 years ago, during one of Brett's classified deployments. Brett's blood ran cold. This was Victor's insurance policy, manufactured evidence of a war crime. If released, this video would destroy Brett's career, his reputation, possibly land him in military prison. The military would have to investigate, and even if they eventually determined it was fake, the damage would be done. Brett would be recalled from civilian life, his custody case dismissed, his credibility obliterated. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Mr. Hayden. Victor's voice was smooth, controlled. I trust you've watched the video. It's fake. Is it? Modern technology is remarkable. Even the best forensic analysts take weeks to prove manipulation. And in the court of public opinion, the accusation is enough. Decorated soldier accused of war crimes? That's a hell of a story. The media would have a field day. You destroy your own credibility by releasing this. Would I? Or would I be a concerned citizen bringing attention to potential war crimes? I wouldn't even have to release it myself. An anonymous leak to the right journalist, and the damage is done. You'd spend years fighting to clear your name, assuming you could. Meanwhile, Tommy stays with my family. Brett's mind raced, analyzing the threat. Victor was desperate, playing his final card. The fake video was dangerous. Technology had advanced to the point where even sophisticated analysis might not immediately prove it was fabricated. And the court of public opinion moved faster than forensics. What do you want? Same as before. Walk away. Leave Virginia. Relinquish custody. Let this whole ugly business die with Malcolm. I'll make sure Tommy's cared for. In exchange, this video disappears, and you get your life back. And if I refuse, then this video goes public tomorrow morning, along with some other materials, anonymous tips about your mental state, suggestions that you've been threatening federal investigators, implications that your entire campaign against my family is the delusion of a traumatized veteran. By the time the truth comes out, if it ever does, you'll be ruined. Your military career, your reputation, your relationship with your son, all gone. Brett closed his eyes, thinking. Victor was right that the video could destroy him in the short term. But Victor was also revealing his desperation by using it. This was a bluff wrapped in a threat. Victor wouldn't release the video if he had better options, which meant the FBI investigation was closing in and the judge was running out of moves. I need time to think about this. You have 12 hours. After that, the video goes public and you lose everything. The line went dead. Brett sat in silence, staring at the paused video on his screen. He'd faced death many times in combat, had made impossible decisions under fire, had learned to function when the world was falling apart. But this was different. This threatened not just his life, but his son's future. He could walk away, let Victor win, and hope the FBI's investigation eventually brought justice. Or he could call Victor's bluff, risk everything, and trust that truth would prevail. Brett thought about Tommy, about all the children Victor and Malcolm had hurt over the years. He thought about Sheila's testimony, Chester's investigation, Dawn's courage in speaking up. He thought about every victim who'd been silenced by power and fear. Then he made his decision. He called Jeffrey Barr. I need you to file an emergency motion with the court. I have evidence that Judge Mason has been manufacturing fake evidence against me. A deepfake video designed to destroy my credibility. Jesus, Brett, do you prove it's fake? Not yet, but I know people who can analyze it. More importantly, I want this on the record before Victor releases it. I want everyone to know he's desperate enough to fabricate war crimes. That desperation is evidence of guilt. This is risky. If the video gets released before we prove it's fake, then we deal with it. But I'm not letting Victor blackmail me into abandoning my son. Brett spent the night reaching out to military contacts, forensic analysts, intelligence officers, technical experts. He sent copies of the video to multiple sources, asking for expedited analysis. Some would take days, others weeks. But one, a former CIA tech specialist named Casey McGee, who owed Brett his life from a mission in Syria, promised results within hours. This is sophisticated work, Casey said over a secure video call. But there's always tells. Give me 4 hours. While Casey worked, Brett prepared for the worst. He called Colonel Schultz and gave him a heads up. He contacted Terrence Washburn at the FBI and warned him about Victor's tactics. He even called a few journalists he trusted, planting seeds that any video released by Victor should be treated with extreme skepticism. Most importantly, he visited Tommy. The protective order had been temporarily suspended pending investigation, and Brett was finally allowed at his son's bedside. Tommy was awake now, weak but conscious. His eyes lit up when Brett entered. "Dad!" Brett knelt beside the bed, careful not to jostle any tubes or wires. "Hey, buddy. I'm so sorry I couldn't be here sooner." "It's okay. The nurses said you were fighting bad guys." Tommy's voice was small, tired. "Did you win?" Brett felt his throat tighten. "Still fighting, Tommy. But I'm going to win. I promise. Malcolm hurt me." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to spill the juice. I tried to clean it up, but he got so mad. He grabbed me, and I was falling, and it hurt so much, Dad. Everything hurt. I know. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Is Malcolm going to come back?" "No. Malcolm's gone. He can't hurt you anymore." Tommy nodded, relieved. "Mom said you were trying to help me, that you were being a hero." Sheila had said that. Maybe his ex-wife was finally choosing their son over the Masons. "I'm not a hero, Tommy. I'm just your dad, doing what dads are supposed to do, protecting their kids. Will I be able to walk again?" Brett wanted to lie, to promise everything would be okay. But Tommy deserved the truth. "I don't know. The doctors are doing everything they can. But even if you can't walk the way you used to, you're still my brave, smart, amazing son. And we'll figure everything out together." Tommy reached for Brett's hand. "Don't leave again." "I won't. I promise." They sat together for an hour, Brett telling Tommy stories about dinosaurs and adventures, avoiding anything about the legal battle or Victor's threats. This was what mattered. This connection, this love, this commitment to protect his child no matter the cost. When Brett left the hospital, his phone buzzed. "Casey McGee, got your analysis. Call me." Brett dialed immediately. "What did you find?" "It's fake. Absolutely, unquestionably fake. Whoever made this was good. They used advanced deepfake algorithms, matched lighting and shadows, even synthesized your voice with neural networks. But they made mistakes. Frame rate inconsistencies, slight visual artifacts around the facial edges, and voice patterns that don't quite match your verified recordings. I've documented everything. This would never hold up in court. How fast can you testify to that? Give me a courtroom, and I'll testify today. This is hack work compared to what I've seen from actual state actors. Whoever made this at skill, but rushed it." Brett felt relief wash over him. "Send me the full report, and be ready to testify if needed." "Already done." "Brett, you got some serious enemies. Watch your back." Brett hung up and called Jeffrey. "The video's fake. I have expert analysis proving it. We can preempt Victor's move. Then let's do it. I'll have the motion filed within the hour, complete with Casey's analysis attached." By midnight, the emergency motion was on the record. By morning, every news outlet had been tipped off. When Victor's fake video surfaced, leaked anonymously to 3 conservative media sites, it was met with immediate skepticism. Brett's legal team released Casey's analysis simultaneously, and within hours, other technical experts confirmed the findings. The fake video backfired spectacularly. Instead of destroying Brett, it destroyed what was left of Victor's credibility. The media narrative shifted again. Judge manufactures evidence against deceased son's accuser. Federal prosecutors announced they were adding evidence tampering to their investigation. Victor Mason had overplayed his hand. The final domino fell when Ellen Davis came forward. Chester had finally tracked her down, living under a different name in Florida. She'd watched the news coverage, seen Victor's desperation, and decided she'd been silent long enough. Ellen met Brett and Jeffrey at a secure location, accompanied by her own lawyer. She was in her 50s, thin and nervous, but with a steel underneath that reminded Brett of his mother. "I worked for Victor Mason for 15 years, Ellen began. Started as a paralegal, eventually became his office manager. I knew everything about his practice, the cases, the clients, the money, and I saw things I shouldn't have." "What kind of things?" Jeffrey asked. Victor was taking bribes, cash payments from clients, hidden in legal fees or consulting agreements. He'd guarantee outcomes in their cases. Charges dropped, light sentences, cases dismissed. He had prosecutors and judges in his pocket. It was systematic, organized corruption on a massive scale. "Do you have proof?" "I kept copies. Not for blackmail. I was just paranoid about being blamed if anything went wrong. Financial records, case files showing impossible outcomes, even some recorded conversations. I stored everything in a safety deposit box 20 years ago and never touched it. Why didn't you come forward when you left?" Ellen's face hardened. Victor found out I knew. He gave me two choices: take a settlement and disappear, or my daughter, who was 15 at the time, would be implicated in a crime Victor would manufacture. He showed me how easily he could destroy her future. So I took the money and left. But my daughter's an adult now, graduated college, building her own life. Victor can't touch her anymore. Will you testify? Yes, I want to testify. I've been carrying this guilt for 5 years, watching Victor hurt people and knowing I could stop it. Malcolm's death, that boy who got hurt, it's all connected to the poison Victor spread. Someone has to stop him. Ellen handed over a key to her safety deposit box. Inside were 20 years of evidence. Ledgers showing cash transactions, case files with handwritten notes about bribes and fixes, photographs of Victor meeting with known criminals, even audio recordings of Victor discussing how to manipulate court proceedings. It was enough to bury him. The FBI arrested Judge Victor Mason at his home on a Thursday morning. News helicopters captured footage of Victor being led away in handcuffs, his patrician face finally showing emotion, shock, rage, and fear. He was charged with racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and evidence fabrication. Bail was set at $5 million, which Victor posted immediately. But his career was over, his reputation destroyed, his empire collapsing. The trial took months to prepare. Brett testified, as did Sheila, Dawn, Chester, Ellen, in a parade of victims the Masons had hurt over the years. Victor's defense team tried every tactic, attacking witnesses, filing motions to suppress evidence, attempting to discredit Brett's military service. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Judge Victor Mason was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. At 68, it was effectively a life sentence. His law license was revoked, his assets seized to pay fines and restitution, his name forever associated with corruption and abuse. Brett stood in the courtroom as the sentence was read, feeling not triumph, but exhaustion. It was over. Finally, truly over. 6 months later, Brett sat in Tommy's room at a rehabilitation facility, watching his son take halting steps using a walker. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic. Tommy had regained some function in his legs, enough to walk with assistance. He'd never run like he used to, would always deal with chronic pain and mobility limitations. But he was alive, healing, and surrounded by people who loved him. "Look, Dad, I made it to the window." Tommy's face beamed with pride. "You did, buddy. You're doing great." Sheila entered, carrying lunch. She looked healthier now, sober, in therapy, rebuilding her life. She and Brett weren't together, would never be together, but they'd found a way to co-parent. United by their love for Tommy and their shared trauma, they'd become allies instead of enemies. "How's he doing?" Sheila asked, getting stronger every day. She squeezed Brett's shoulder. Thank you. For fighting for him. For fighting for all of us. I wasn't going to let them win. I know. That's what makes you different from them. Brett's phone buzzed. Colonel Schultz. He excused himself and took the call outside. Sir. Hayden, you sitting down? Should I be? The Army wants to award you a medal. Civilian Service Commendation for your work exposing corruption and protecting civil rights. It's normally reserved for civilian employees, but they're making an exception. You're a goddamn hero. Brett laughed, surprised. I'm not a hero, sir. I was just a father protecting his son. That's exactly what heroes do. They don't do it for glory. They do it because someone has to. Congratulations, Brett. You earned this. After hanging up, Brett stood in the parking lot, looking up at the sky. The war was over. Victor Mason was in prison. Malcolm was dead. Tommy was healing. The community was rebuilding, learning to trust their institutions again. But Brett knew there would always be another Victor Mason, another Malcolm, another corrupt system protecting predators. Justice was a continuous fight, not a single victory. For now, though, he had his son. He had a second chance to be the father Tommy deserved. And that was victory enough. Brett walked back inside, where Tommy was attempting to walk without the walker, determined and stubborn and brave. Just like his father. Dad, watch this. Tommy took 2 shaky steps before nearly falling. Brett caught him, holding him steady. I've got you, Tommy. I'll always have you. And for the first time in months, Brett Hayden allowed himself to smile. Not because everything was perfect, but because they'd survived. They'd fought impossible odds and won. They'd faced monsters and emerged stronger. That was worth celebrating. That night, Brett returned to his small apartment, the motel long abandoned for something more permanent, and opened his laptop. He'd been documenting everything, writing down the story of what happened. Not for publication, not for glory, but because someone needed to remember. The victims needed their stories told. The truth needed to be preserved. He typed the final lines. They say justice is blind. But justice isn't blind. It's just slow, and it requires people willing to fight for it. Not lawyers in courtrooms, though they're important. Not judges on benches, though they're necessary. But ordinary people who refuse to accept that power can shield evil. Who stand up when it would be easier to sit down. Who fight when every instinct says to flee. I'm not special. I'm just a father who loved his son and couldn't accept a world where monsters walked free. But maybe that's all heroism really is. Love translated into action. Courage born from desperation. Justice delivered by those who refuse to quit. Tommy's walking again. Not perfectly, but walking. And every step he takes is a victory not just for him, but for everyone who ever faced a bully, a predator, a corrupt system designed to protect the powerful. We won, not because I was smarter or tougher than Victor Mason, but because truth eventually outlasts lies. Light eventually burns through darkness, and love eventually defeats cruelty. That's the lesson I'll teach my son. That's the legacy I want to leave. In the end, we're all just fighting to protect what matters. And what matters is each other. Brett saved the document and closed his laptop. Tomorrow, he'd go back to the hospital. He'd help Tommy with physical therapy. He'd have dinner with his mother. He'd call Chester and Dawn and thank them again. He'd live his life, one day at a time, building something good from the wreckage. But tonight, he allowed himself rest. He'd earned it. The war was over, and Brett Hayden had won.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.